Thank you also for the opportunity to be here today with you. Actually, my first question would have been, by now you mentioned it, how many here noticed that there was a UN Climate Action Summit last Monday? I hope most of you. Because when I read Pakistani press the day after, only one newspaper of the ones that I could read carried it on the first page, and only in a small paragraph. And the other newspapers had it on page 5 or page 8 as small segments. And I think one of the key messages I would like to give today is that I have met the opinion here that climate action and the need to go green is something that the richer countries should do, the developing countries should do. They were the first to start into industrialization. They were the first to start CO2 emissions. But the basic thing is that a lot of countries are those that would be most affected by climate change. And Pakistan is among the potentially 10 most affected countries. So it is not something that everybody can just write off. It's something that we all have to take seriously. The other argument, I think, is that the countries that do not go into green transition will be the economic losers of the future. Today, it is hard to see that there is any way that a non-green economy can be viable for several reasons. One reason is that of all the research and development going in, new productions method will hinge upon green solutions. So if you do not have them available, you will not be able to avail yourself of green solutions in production. In many areas, green solutions have become cheaper, in particular in energy. To stay with fossil energy today, only losing economies will do that. For the simple reason that solar and wind will produce at 2 cents per kilowatt hour, coal not less than 8, and gas a little the same. We're talking about sort of global prices, but the basic thing is that wind and solar are by far the most cheap. The countries that stay with fossil energy solutions will have less economic competitivity. They will not be able to compete on prices because they will pay too much for their energy. Also, one thing that people are not really realizing now, but it's actually something that will be felt very much in the years to come. Most developing countries, they need exports. They need to export. They need to be export driven. For an economy like Pakistan's to grow, it needs 20-25% of the GDP in export. Currently, it's only 5 to 6%, which is far too little for a developing economy. Pakistan needs to bring in money to be able to pay for developing the country. It cannot subsist on just 5 to 6% and going equal with the imports. But Pakistan and other countries will have a problem if the products they are trying to export are not produced in a sustainable way, for 2 reasons. Three reasons. One reason is the one I mentioned. It is that the production capital, the production methods will more increasingly be green and are not compatible with non-sustainable production methods, the old ones. The production methods of tomorrow will be very different from the production methods of today. That's one thing. The other thing is that already now what we are seeing is that consumers all over the world are going away from products that are not produced sustainably. In the first instance, this is happening in the way that consumers are favorizing products that are produced sustainably. A good example is a Danish company called Carlsberg. A 6-pack of beer, which is a normal product in Denmark, was wrapped in plastic. Now they have taken away that plastic and found a way to glue together the cans in a 6-pack, saving quite a lot of plastic. In fact, millions of tons of plastic can be saved in this way. Starbucks doing coffee, they had, on their to-go coffee, they had a plastic lid, they had straws. They are now changing the plastic lids and they're abolishing the straws. Companies are feeling this pressure for sustainable production. And that is why they are going onto this boat, because it makes economic sense. So in the years to come, if a product, a t-shirt coming out of Pakistan, it cannot certify itself as being produced sustainably, people will not buy it. It is really as simple as that. So countries that do not have a sustainable production cannot say this is done organic produce, this is done sustainable energy-wise and so forth. They will have less market share in the future compared to what they can have today. So that's one of two economic arguments. And the third is, it's only a matter of time before the main importing countries will put a ban on non-sustainable products. This ban is going to come. We know it's going to come. It will come a little further down the line, but it will come. I don't give it more than 8, maybe 10 years before there is a full ban on products that are not produced sustainably. And which will mean that the time to make the transition to sustainable production is now. And not for the sake of the climate, for the reason that it makes good economic sense. In fact, it's the only thing that makes economic sense. It is to go for the green transition today. Also, a lot of products produce cheaper if you do them in a sustainable way. And green transition takes funding. It does take money to make a green transition. And there are now funds being made available to fund this. And Denmark, together with a group of countries, created something known as PG4. It's Partnership to Growth. Partnership for Growth, that's why it's for. P4G, with a 4 in between. Which basically is a mechanism to finance partnerships between, let's say, a company or an NGO in Pakistan and a company or an NGO in Denmark or in Europe or elsewhere. Even better, also together with a government institution. And they will have a partnership of up to $1 million in either creating a new basis for making sustainable production in a country like Pakistan, or in creating new solutions, or in scaling up solutions within green production. So it's quite a good mechanism. More and more countries are joining this mechanism. And what is being discussed right now in New York is actually to expand this mechanism so that it encompasses the international community, perhaps with another name, but it encompasses the international community, creating partnerships between the developed countries and the developing countries. Denmark, under the UN Climate Action Summit, Denmark together with Ethiopia have the lead on energy transition. And as you know, energy or energy production is responsible for 80% of CO2 emissions. So it's a very important area. And I'm very happy to see that Pakistan is now, with its new energy plan coming up anytime now, is looking at a major transition in the way energy is produced. Looking at going 30% renewable, from 3 to 4% at this point in time, to 30% new renewable, non-hydro, new renewable by 2030, only 11 years from now. And if you combine that with the 25-30% hydro, that will be a good share. And it will be a good stepping stone for Pakistan to reach the target of being climate neutral in the energy area by 2050. So we're very much looking forward to this plan. We're also very much looking forward to help financing it. There will be financing available. Financing will often be linked to solutions. But in Denmark, we were the first to start energy transition to renewable. We were not the first to do windmills or wind turbines. That happened all the way back in the 1930s in the US, and in the UK they were the first sort of wind turbines being produced. But the modern ones, made for large-scale energy production, that happened in the 1970s in Denmark. And that is something that now makes the Danish energy sector the most renewable, and not only the most renewable, but also the most reliable, and also the most the cheapest. So what has happened is that what is needed if you have renewable energy, it is that you have to find ways of handling variability. It's always the main critique you hear You only have electricity when the wind blows. You only have electricity when the sun shines. And that is, of course, an issue. You cannot just plug and play as you can with fossil fuels. Now you turn it on, now you turn it off. There is some issues in it. But all this can be handled through planning and by making a energy distribution network that is intelligent or smart. And this is one of the solutions that Denmark is cooperating with India on. India is undergoing a big transition towards this. They're developing their entire grid. They're making a smart grid, building it on numerous sources of energy, more and more renewable. What the Danish Technical University is cooperating with them about is trying to sense from the net through smart meters when the variability will come and predict it. So you can start compensating in real time, intraday, with other energy sources. And this way of creating, which will be, when it's finished in a couple of years, it will be the smartest grid globally. It will be the smartest distribution grid globally once it functions. It will be intelligent. The machines operating it will be intelligent. They will themselves develop new ways of measuring what is happening in this grid. All these solutions are also available to Pakistan, which is something that the government and all those working in the energy area is now realizing, and that's why this new energy plan is coming out. If you take now, the subject is what we have done and what we are doing in the climate field. I mean, one of the things that clearly is very visible, and if you sort of read international media, you will also find it's very visible, is that the mindset is changing quite rapidly. Climate action used to be driven by a few think tanks, NGOs, perhaps some in government, but not all of government. Now that is spreading out. It's all of the government, it's most of the think tank sector, it's most of the NGO sector, most of civil society if you want. It's citizens and it's companies. Now the competition is to do green transition faster and quicker and better than your competitor, which is a good competition. So there is international commitments to be climate neutral by 2050. If that happens, the world would end up with a temperature rise of 2 to 3 degrees, not the 1.5 that was predicted or hoped for. It will be more. 3 degrees for Pakistan is too much. For Pakistan, that will mean too many floods and too much drought. It will mean there will be extreme heat in parts of Pakistan that will make those parts uninhabitable. It will mean that there will be in the agriculture areas there will be lack of water. Agriculture, as we know it in Pakistan now, cannot continue in just 10 years' time. It will not be viable, not with the way water is being used in agriculture. 85% of all water in Pakistan is being used for agriculture. It should be 10%. The same product can be produced at 10% if you do it through smart watering. So there are some challenges if we stick to the Paris targets and the SDGs. So we had a new government just before the summer, or in the beginning of the summer, and they have set up a very ambitious climate plan. They want to reduce to 70% emissions. They want to reduce CO2 emissions by 70% before 2030, and that's a major thing. And they want to abolish fossil fuel cars by 2030 as well. At that time, there will only be electrical or fuel cell cars driving in our streets. We are now investing heavily in research and development in green solutions. More than $10 billion per year is going into research into these areas. Just in Denmark alone, and all over the globe, you have the same. There's a lot of money going into green transitions. Fuel cells today, they're still fairly heavy. They can fuel trucks, they can fuel buses easily, they can fuel cars easily, and then the transition to this system is now already taking place. The hybrid cars are almost going out and being taken over by electrical cars and fuel cell cars. But we do know that within 5 to 10 years, research in fuel cells will be so rapid that a fuel cell that today is this size for a car will be this size for a car, which means that if you do it this size for a car, it will go thousands of kilometers on one tank up. So we know this technology will come. We just need to avail ourselves of it faster so that it can grow even faster. There is a corporation known as the C40. It now is not 40, it's City 40, but it's a corporation between the largest capitals or the largest cities in the world, those with 3 million plus, or the innovative cities in the world. Copenhagen is not quite 3 million, but they are also part of it by being innovative in solutions for cities. Cities is a major factor. Cities do many things. Cities use about 70% of all energy. They are responsible for 80% of all CO2 emissions. That goes for what is being burnt in the city, what is being used in the city, the energy to feed the city. All that put together makes cities the biggest CO2 emitters. But cities also have lots of resources. And that makes cities much more able to invest in future solutions. So the C40 corporation, all the major cities of the world, including Karachi, for some reason only Karachi, but Karachi is part of this as well, basically goes on finding solutions, sharing those solutions among the cities, and helping each other to finance solutions from those cities that have a lot of money to those who do not have so many funds, but which could use the investment to help them transition. And we're not just talking about energy production, we're also talking about waste. We're talking about waste products and all this. Copenhagen, there will be a summit, a C40 summit in Copenhagen in October, 9 to 13 October, I think it is, in which all the mayors of the major cities of the world will come together to talk about committing to making a plan within a year for all these major cities around the world for how to become climate neutral, not by 2050, but by 2030. If the major cities can do this and spearhead this evolution, then it's actually extremely exciting news for the world, because they are the big emitters. So if they can change, and I can give you some examples of what they're looking at. Yesterday I was at a small sort of launch of Say No to Plastic initiative in Pakistan. Islamabad has now banned since August the use of single-use plastic bags, which is a really, really good thing. Not even Denmark has this. It's a really good step, because it's something that is really polluting Pakistan. And one plastic bag takes 400 to 500 years to decompose in the earth, and it will pollute quite a lot in the process of doing it. So it's a really good initiative. I will give you some examples of how we have tried to manage waste, because waste is a big issue, and it will be a big issue once we get further down the line. I will explain in a little minute. In 1942, bottles like this, at that time, back in 1942, it was glass, almost all glass bottles. And people were just throwing them everywhere. And they were breaking, and dogs were cutting their paws on them, children were cutting their feet on them, because people would just throw them. So in 1942, government decided, if you buy one of these, you want your drink, your Coke or your juice or whatever, you have to add a little more. In Danish it's 1 kroner, it will be some rupees here. That is added to the price. When you bring it back, you get your money back. And from bottles, then in the 70s we got the plastic bottles, then it was extended to the plastic bottles, then we got the metal cans, then it was extended to the metal cans. Now any container will have this system. You pay a little extra for it. If you give it back, you basically get your money back. And what that has done in Denmark is that only 10% of containers like this, of any container, is not given back. 10% for some reason is lost. But instead of 100% being waste, 90% will be reused and recycled. The bottles will be recycled. These will be squashed and made into new plastic bottles. The cans the same. They will be squashed and molten into new cans. Only 10%, and this is a system that is operated since 1942 with great success. It makes it economically viable. The 10% of the bottles or the containers that are not given back, they pay for the entire system, because the consumer is then paying for the system because they are not getting their money back. So this little amount of money will actually pay for the entire system. So that's just one example of how to handle waste. Another one was, I learned that more than 160,000 tons of waste flow out, 160, million tons of waste flow out of the Indus River every year. The Indus River is the second most polluting river in the entire world after the Yangtze in China. It is 160,000 tons, yeah. And in Denmark, on the 4th of October, a new waste-to-energy plant will be inaugurated. That plant alone, it's in the middle of Copenhagen. Its way of burning the waste will be so clean that they could place it in the middle of Copenhagen. Really, you could see the Royal Palace, you can see the Houses of Parliament from this structure. It will burn more than, or around 500,000 tons of waste every year. That will be the waste that cannot be recycled. That will be burned here. It's turned into energy instead. Just one such plant could take all of the waste coming out of the Indus River. No problem. And because it produces energy, so in its lifespan of 30 years, its minimum lifespan is 30 years. In that time, the investment cost will be met. So this plant will probably either go zero to cost, or it will turn a profit. Which means that if you can obtain a loan, and it's not particularly expensive to do a plant like this, perhaps $200 million, if you can obtain a loan to do a plant like this, and you can pay it back over, say, 25 or 30 years, it is sustainable. I mean, it will pay itself. This plant is also innovative in many other ways because for these operations to handle is quite a tall structure, 85 meters. And in Denmark, it's a very flat country, but we like skiing. So they've made 3 ski slopes on the top of this plant in the middle of Copenhagen. So as a pastime, then you can go and you can go skiing in the middle of Copenhagen just for fun. That will add extra income to the structure. It will be on artificial grass. The only time you cannot ski is when the snow falls, and for some reason it can't really operate. And that's called the Ark. And this is also one of the solutions that are immediately relevant for Pakistan, for the simple reason that it can be built fairly quickly. Economically, it can be financed because it produces energy to the net. And in Pakistan, the prices of energy are higher. So in the beginning, at least, it could produce at a higher, it could earn more money than it could in Denmark, where the energy prices are the lowest in the world. So there are solutions like this. We have a number, I think we have 32 of waste-to-energy plants. And they will take the waste that cannot be recycled. But we're going through a process within 10 to 12 years, all waste will be recycled. Recycled, reshared, reused, redone. Like yesterday, they were showing plastic bags or plastic in Pakistan being reused for shopping bags, multiple use shopping bags, being reused for very nice handbags, being reused for raincoating for agricultural laborers. There are so many uses that it can be used for. So this is just to say that there are actually some ways of, and something that is also for Pakistan very relevant, some ways of going into green transition that is relevant. Green transition normally focuses on 4 things. It focuses on energy. We talked about energy. What the basic message is, the more renewable you go, the more competitive your economy will be, because renewable energy sources, the new ones, wind, solar, and biomass are by far cheaper compared to gas, oil, and coal. The other one is water. We need to be able to manage our water resources better. That is globally. Denmark is one of the few countries in the world that has more water, fresh water available, not less. We have a lot of rain. We have it all the time, in fact. So that's why we have a lot of water. But countries like Pakistan will have less water, especially in the agricultural areas. They will become more arid. The basin in Punjab and Sindh, where most agriculture in Pakistan is, will become more arid and warmer. Agriculture will become harder there. So water, we need to find ways of handling that better. And solutions already exist that are also cheap. Water pumps run by solar energy. You could put it into the wilderness and it will take care of itself. Smart watering systems are not that expensive. It's a smart meter, and then it's tubes with some holes in it that will go out and deliver the water exactly where it's needed and not spread it everywhere, which is a little bit the tendency right now. Saving on the water. So energy and water are two things where Pakistan is already moving or can move. And then you have resources. There's something called the Earth Overshoot Day. The Earth Overshoot Day is a fantastic concept. It is the time during a calendar year when we have used this year's budget of resources. The resources we have globally is made into a sort of economic budget. How much can we use during a year that can be replenished after? Water, minerals, for all resources. So that is an amount. And since 1970, we are using more than we can replenish every year. It goes for almost all resources. We're using more than we can actually replenish by the technology we have today. And Earth Overshoot Day this year was 29 July. So on the 29th of July, our use of resources for this year was met. What we can sustainably use this year, we used by 29 July. Everything we're using after, we're taking from the years to come. If we don't do it in a different way, if we don't start to recycle, share much more than we are doing now. So Earth Overshoot Day has moved backwards every year since 1970. 1970 was the last year we were in balance. It's been moving backwards, and it's hitting the countries that have the highest population growth hardest. So Pakistan has one of the highest population growth in the world. So Pakistan, on the resource side, will be hit harder than most other countries. In Denmark, we're sort of fairly stable. We have a small growth, so our resources are growing because we're using less and less resources to the same. I can give you one example. Since 1990, Denmark has had 50% economic growth. So our economy has grown by 50% since 1990. By way of energy, we use 8% less energy, but we use 19 million tons of CO2 less now than we did in 1990. And if we had continued as we were doing in 1990 without any change, we would use 58 million tons more. So the total reduction is almost 50% if we compare to the path of not doing energy transition or green transition compared to starting green transition. So that's something that each country has to think about, because if we look to these areas, energy, water, resources, and the fourth one is cities, because cities are the shakers and movers of this world. Everything, all development happens in cities. If cities can show the way ahead, everything else on this globe will follow. That is why the C40 Corporation is so interesting. So my last message will be that in these four areas, there are solutions available to Pakistan. Some of them are small and can be scaled up. Some of them are bright ideas that just turn into good ways of doing things. I can tell you one thing in research and development that is being done in Denmark now. It is how you can store CO2 emissions in stone. You can actually store CO2 underground where it belongs. And coal comes from underground. It's been stored in coal for a long time. Coal is a pretty hard type of product. So why can we not find a way of storing it in other types of stone? And they're very close now to finding ways of simply storing it in stone. And then you have, new ways of taking CO2 out of the equation. So solutions are available. Cooperation across the line, between countries like Denmark and Pakistan would be the way forward. Now it's not only Denmark, it's of course all the other developing economies. This would be the way to help the entire world go through green transition. If a country goes through green transition, they become economic winners. Today, Denmark produces about 20% of our export are green solutions in all areas. We were the first to move on wind turbines. And we still have two of the biggest companies doing it, Vestas, which is 17% of the global market in wind turbines, and a company known as Siemens Gamesa, which is actually a German-Spanish company, but their wind turbine production is in Denmark, so we consider them Danish. But we are losing, of course, our edge, which we should. I mean, wind turbines should be produced everywhere. Goldwind in China is producing them. Because this is a solution to the climate challenge. So now we're looking for other areas, and one of the areas we're really investing a lot in now is storage. How to store energy, and lithium batteries, they can become more effective. You can scale them up a little bit, and they can have some. A company like Vestas, they're doing so-called hybrid solutions. They're doing a windmill, solar, and Tesla batteries, lithium batteries. And lithium battery technology can take us to a certain level. Vestas has done plants, these hybrid plants. They can evacuate 4 megawatt sustainably over the day, irrespective of the wind. But now the research is going into completely new types of batteries, completely new ways of storing it inside batteries. It's known as power to X. And Denmark is trying to be the lead nation in developing this. And there are 3 islands now that are looking at producing just sustainable, just renewable energy. They will be the first entities in the world that will be only covered by sustainable energy. So the challenge for them is to handle the variability of the wind and of the sun. And the solution is new batteries. There's a Danish company called Volta, and they do some batteries that it will be stored during the daytime when the sun shines and when the wind blows, and then they can use the energy on these islands whenever they need. It's Madeira Island, a Spanish one, down south of Denmark in a way, west of here, I guess. It's the Orkney Islands off the coast of Scotland, and it's an island called Samsø in Denmark. Those are the 3 pioneer islands for this new Danish technology for small communities. The relevance of Pakistan of such a thing is for the small, not for islands, because Pakistan do not really have that many islands, but there's a lot of areas that are not covered by access to electricity, access to information, that are left behind of development. The rural areas, the far deep rural areas, and it will be relevant solutions for them. Also because it's not expensive solutions. So in all these areas, there are solutions. It's highly relevant for Pakistan if Pakistan wants to stay economically competitive. And it's something that we should not do only for ourselves, but because the impact of what happens if we do not do a green transition fast enough will impact all of us. Thank you very much.